Hello, welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 60. In this session, we'll understand the difference between strings of type system.string and system.text.string builder. In fact, the difference is very simple. Strings of type system.string are immutable, whereas strings of type string builder are mutable. Okay, so what do we mean by mutable and immutable? Let's understand with an example, and then we'll understand the advantage of using string builder when heavy string manipulation is involved. Okay, let's say I have a simple program like this string, let's say user string variable, and initially I'm actually initializing this to C sharp. Let's say I want to print a word C sharp video tutorial for beginners. The way I can do is, I initially initialize that to C sharp, and then maybe I will concatenate that again plus equals. Maybe we will say C sharp video, and you can concatenate them like this. So obviously what we are doing here is we are manipulating this string object. We are changing this string object many times. So C sharp video tutorial, and maybe here for, and maybe here. So if you look at this, you have changed the string almost 5 times. Initially you have initialized that to C sharp and then changed that to C sharp video by concatenating this word, and then C sharp video tutorial for beginners. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You are basically changing the same string object 5 times. So what actually happens when you change it 5 times? Okay, this is what happens in memory. Look at this. When you first initialize the string, this variable user string to C sharp, what happens? This variable gets created. This reference variable gets created on the stack, which will be pointing to the C sharp object initially, and you wouldn't have all these objects. Okay, so it will be pointing to this, and then when we have this line user string is equal to user string plus video, when we have this line, so what's going to happen, you know this object, this reference variable now is pointing to this object. So as soon as this line gets executed, what happens? The reference variable will no longer point to this object. It will instead create another new string object, because this string once created, this object once created, it's immutable, meaning you cannot change that object in memory there. Instead, when this line gets executed, what actually happens is this object you know will remain there in the memory. Another new string objects get created. This value within this object will be copied over, and to that, this word will be concatenated in this new object. Okay, so now your reference variable will be pointing to this object. But then when it encounters this line, what happens? Even this object is discarded, in the sense your reference variable will no longer point to that object. It will now be pointing to this object, copying that value and then tutorial word together, and then forms this new string object. So it goes on. Okay, so here if you look at this, we just manipulated it 5 times, and we ended up with how many objects? 5 objects, and 4 are actually thrown away. I mean, they are not used at all, but they still remain in memory. They occupy the amount of memory they occupy. Okay, so when will they be cleaned, and who will clean them? Garbage collector. So until the garbage collector runs, these objects are going to stay in the memory on the heap, and there is going to be memory pressure for your program. So obviously anytime when you manipulate string over and over and over again, you will have so many objects created. Here we are changing the string object 5 times, so we have 4 orphaned string objects. Orphaned meaning there is no reference variable pointing to these objects. That's why these are considered garbage, and they will be cleaned when the garbage collector runs. Okay, but this object is not garbage. Why? Because there is a reference variable pointing to it at this point, pointing to this object. So when somebody says, print the value that is contained in user string variable, what happens? It goes and checks what is the value in this object, pulls that value and prints it. Okay, so this object is not garbage, but all these are garbage. So since strings of type system.string are immutable, they cannot be changed once created. That is what is the meaning of immutable. Okay, but whereas strings of type string builder are mutable, meaning no matter how many times you change your string builder object, you wouldn't get new objects. The same object will be changed in memory. So even if you change the object 10,000 times, you will still have only one string builder object. You don't have a lot of garbage objects or orphaned string builder objects. Because why? It can be changed, it's mutable, basically changeable over time. But whereas strings of type system.string are immutable, you cannot change them once created. If you have to change them, then what happens? That object will be discarded, another new object gets created to which the values will be copied over, and your reference variable will now be pointing to that new object. So that's how strings of type system.string gets changed. They are immutable. Okay, so we can rewrite. I mean, actually, if we print this as you expect, we get that C# video tutorial for beginners message. So let's print that. So as we expect, we get that. Now, to make this program a little more efficient, what you can actually do is use string builder object. Okay, so instead of using this string, we use string builder. And string builder class, the string class is actually present in system namespace, but whereas string builder is present in system.text namespace. So let's import that, and then instead of using string, I'm going to say string builder. Okay, so user string is equal to new string builder, and there are several overloaded versions of this constructor, so I'm going to use the version which takes in a string object and create that. And obviously, if it is a string builder object, you cannot use plus equals to concatenate those strings. Instead, what you need to do is there is a method called append, so we need to use that append method. So when we use the append method, we can concatenate the strings together. So let's do the same thing for the other things that we have. Okay, and finally, if you want the string representation of that string builder object, we use the toString method. And now when you run this program, as you might expect, there wouldn't be any change in the output, except that our program will perform a little better now. It doesn't create unnecessary, string objects, the orphaned string objects. So anytime there is heavy manipulation of strings involved, always use string builder rather than strings, because it's good for performance. You don't end up with a lot of orphaned string objects on the heap. So as string builder objects are mutable, they offer better performance than string objects of type system.string when heavy string manipulation is involved. Okay, just imagine, I just want to show you a very simple program. Let's say I have a program like this, maybe string user string is equal to string.empty. Initially, we are creating an empty string, so one string object gets created in the heap. And then there is a loop like this. For int I is equal to 1, maybe I less than or equal to 10,000, I plus plus. And what we are basically doing here is user string plus equals, I want to add to that the number and then a space. So what's going to happen now? We are going to add numbers 1 space 2 space 3 space 4 until 10,000 into this string variable, and finally we will just print that. Now, as you might expect now, since strings of type system.string are immutable, how many objects do you think gets created? There are like 2,000, 20,000, 10,000 objects get created. Okay, 10,001 in fact, because we have this object already created here. And out of this 10,001 objects, we will use only one string object. The other 9,999 objects or 10,000 objects are orphaned, we no longer use them. They are just there sitting and floating on the heap, waiting for the garbage collector to run and destroy them. Until then, the program will be under severe memory pressure. So when we run this, as you might expect, it prints those numbers. But just imagine how many, orphaned string objects get created on the heap. So that's why when heavy string manipulation is involved, always use strings of type system.text.string builder rather than strings of type system.string. So to brief up, in summary, there are basically three differences between system.string and system.text.string builder. Okay, uh, strings of type system.string are present in system.string namespace, whereas string builder is present in system.text.string builder namespace. And one of the main differences is strings of type system.string are immutable, whereas string builder strings are mutable. And because of which we have better performance using string builder objects over system.string if there is heavy string manipulation involved. So this diagram should give you a very good idea about what we mean by mutable and immutable. Immutable means you can change them in place. Those objects can be changed once created, whereas immutable means they cannot be changed. If you have to change them, you will end up creating another object. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET and C# interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.